Max Q Productions presents Calling All Stations, a novel, written and narrated by Gilles Messier. Part 1. The Spanish Prisoner. Chapter 1. Childhood's End. Like all men from Adam on down, I have lived upon this earth as the good Lord made it. A vast place, solid through and through, where to see distant lands is to wear out one's boots or trust in Neptune's good graces. Yet for a few bright moments in this knockabout life, I have seen the walls of time and space fall away, and the wide world brought to my doorstep. The sands of Arabia, the jungles of darkest Africa, the jewels of India, all lay but a stone's throw away. Thus have I roved farther than Marco Polo could in 3 lifetimes. It is only by God's grace that I came to be such a citizen of the world, for there can be no lonelier life than that of lighthouse keeper. And the beacon on which I found myself marooned at the tender age of 8 was the loneliest of them all, the Bell Rock. When the fogs rolled in from the east, you truly felt at the ends of the earth. Had all of creation crumbled around me, I would scarcely have known it. It was here I spent my boyhood days with my father, an old soldier who had traded firing shells across no man's land for firing beams of light across Lunan Bay. That he had answers so humanitarian a calling was strange indeed, for father saw the world as one vast leper colony. He was happiest, if I can use that word, when the fog blotted out all sight of shore. Clad in oilskins, beads of spray gathering on his great whiskers, he would stand at the rail for hours staring out into the grey void, like the exiled king of the walruses yearning for his throne amid the icebergs. You could say I had 3 fathers. I hardly knew the first. Gone off to war when I was 4, he lived mostly in mother's bedtime stories. For 2 years we waited his triumphant return, when, as mother said, the dastardly Hun would at last be defeated. I hadn't a clue what a Hun was, but I imagined a fearsome dragon, with Father as St. George on white horse with shining lance, old England victorious again. But that knock on the door that bright July day brought not a knight, but a herald, and the dreaded telegram. In a far-off land called Flanders, St. George had fallen, felled by the dragon's fire. My second father, Cecil, appeared not long after. He was a quiet man, a civil servant of some sort who seldom spoke to me. But he was never cruel or unpleasant, and despite the rationing we enjoyed the best Christmas dinners, and I the best toys, in many years. And so for a while, we were happy. Then, one cold November night, my third father appeared. I was playing by the fireplace with my tin soldiers when he burst through the door, a ghoulish apparition wrapped in muddy khaki and blood-stained bandages. In the middle of his mummified head, a single eye burned with fury, not St. George, but the dragon. The moment that eye fell on Mother and Cecil, the mouth below opened and unleashed the most fearsome torrent of bile and vitriol I had ever heard, gnashing and foaming like a mad dog's. And before I could even stand, he seized my arm and dragged me to my feet and towards the door. Mother shrieked and chased after him, begging and pleading as she lashed at his back, but one stroke of his powerful arm sent her crashing to the floor, and I was wrenched out into the cold. Father tossed me into the cab of a waiting lorry, and before I knew what had happened, we were trundling down dark country roads, leaving London far behind. "Leaves me for dead, does she?" Father muttered. "Ungrateful little whore." He pulled a little brown glass bottle from his pocket, took a draught, and pulled on a white cotton mask, the kind I'd seen many people wearing out in the streets. Then he held out the bottle to me, but I shook my head. "Take it, little shit," he growled. It felt like hot brimstone going down, and I was ill for the rest of the journey. We drove for days, sleeping in the lorry and eating from tins of bully beef until we reached the coast at our breath. Father bundled me down a key to a waiting motor launch, and we sailed out onto a cast-iron sea. Fearfully I clutched the gunwales as the shore receded swiftly behind us and was swallowed by the fog, leaving only a grey void in all directions. For a moment I wonder if Father was trying to cross the North Sea. A mad proposition. Surely we would be drowned. But suddenly a leviathan materialized from the fog, a black, wave-lashed turret towering like a lonely chessman over a vast slate playing board. The Bell Rock. "Welcome home," said Father. I would not set foot ashore for 2 long years. I have heard it argued that the pace of modern schooling ought to be increased, for a properly motivated child is capable of learning far faster than any schoolmaster dare admit. On these merits, I hold up Bell Rock as among the finest learning establishments in the land. My grueling education began the moment I set foot on its stones. Made to master every duty required of a keeper, in a few short weeks I became a tolerable seaman, able to tie 4 dozen knots, read the weather, fix and maintain the arc lamp, send and receive messages by flag, semaphore, and Aldous lamp. A man of few words, Father spoke through his old army swagger stick, every gaffe and oversight corrected with the lash. From dawn to dusk I toiled under his exacting watch, and for every skill gained my back bore a fresh scar, red badges of mastery. There was no time to think of mother or the home I'd left behind. There were lenses to be polished, motors to be oiled, the work of 3 grown men on the shoulders of a boy. Only at the stroke of midnight, when I was at last permitted to retire, did I find a moment to cry before exhaustion bore me swiftly off to sleep. As the months passed, even this punishing routine grew rote and tiresome, and this little stone world began to feel very small indeed. Many a time I found myself at the rail, staring out at the coast, no more than a faint grey line in the haze. Father never set foot ashore, nor only visitors were the supply boats from the signal tower and fishermen bearing mail or fresh bread. And such was Father's notion of hospitality, on more than one occasion I thought of raising the quarantine flag to save these poor souls the ordeal. But what Bell Rock lacked in human contact, it made up for in books. Father kept a well-stocked library on every subject a keeper could need, from meteorology to flags, telegraphy, engineering, and maritime law. These were a great comfort when I retired to my bedroom, little more than a damp straw mattress and a blanket tucked in the corner of the larder. On the wall behind me, a crude wooden shelf held a paraffin lamp and my only worldly possession, Sergeant George, a tin soldier I'd had in my pocket the night of my abduction. When my first father had gone off to war, Mother told me that if ever I was in danger, Sergeant George would come to life and protect me. He never did, so despite everything, I knew I was safe. Every night, by sputtering paraffin flame, I read of triode valves, cumulus clouds, foreign languages, and the laws of salvage, often managing only a page or two before drifting off to sleep. And in those brief snatches of study, I gradually amassed a vast wealth of knowledge. Though lacking in letters, Latin, and philosophy, I challenge any Eton alum to boast of so practical an education as mine. In those rare moments between duties, I would sit at the rail with field glasses and watch the ships sail in and out of Dundee Harbour. I made a game of it, deducing the make, nationality, and even speed of every vessel. But though I knew every flag that sailed past, I knew little of the men who sailed under them. I could read their languages and draw maps of their homelands from memory, but I could scarcely tell a Swede from a Sikh. The world beyond Bell Rock remained a great unknown, a featureless void from which the ships came and went. It was a year before I spoke to another Christian soul. A November gale had knocked out the dynamo, and a repairman was duly dispatched. He was an old wizened Scot with wild red whiskers and a youthful spring in his step. As the launch pulled up to the beacon, he nimbly leaped aboard and doffed his cap with a sweeping, theatrical bow. "McGowan at your service, sir," he said. "Where might the problem be?" "You know perfectly well where the problem is," said Father coldly. "Now get to it." Not a very happy master, I see," McGowan sighed as Father stormed up the stairs. "Well, it takes all kinds, I suppose." Though I tried to carry on my duties as usual, curiosity soon got the better of me, and I crept down to the dynamo room where the mass of whirling gears and drive shafts lay seized and silent. I crouched on the steps and watched, enthralled, as McGowan stripped down the machinery with practiced grace and efficiency. Oh, to have a life such as his, I thought, a roving master of man's modern marvels. Within minutes, McGowan had reassembled the dynamo, and at the press of a button, the engine sputtered to life. The air filled with a clattering din, the room lights flickering wildly. McGowan shut off the engine and leaned back against the wall, pensively stroking his chin. "No need to hide up there, lad," he said. With a start, I sprang to my feet and made to scurry away, but McGowan glanced up and flashed me a warm smile. "It's all right, lad," he said brightly. "I don't bite. What can I do for you?" In my astonishment at being so warmly addressed, I'm afraid my mouth ran away from me. "I know what's wrong with it, sir," I blurted. "Do you now, little master?" said McGowan with a mischievous smirk. "And what might that be?" I said nothing. "It's all right, lad." "The carbon brushes, sir," I said. "One is broken." "Quite right," said McGowan. "Now what makes you think that?" "Because of the lights," I said. "They only flash at half frequency, sir." "Oh, very good, little master," said McGowan, his eyes twinkling with delight. "Now where'd you learn a thing like that?" "Books, sir," I said. "Father has books on all sorts of things." "You'd make a fine sparky for sure," said McGowan, doffing his cap at me. My eyes widened. "Could I, sir?" I exclaimed. "Come with you, I mean." "What, as my apprentice?" said McGowan. I nodded excitedly. "I work hard, sir, and well, I swear I do." McGowan flashed a wry grin and leaned in close. "Are you sure you wants to work with the likes of me, Jim?" he said in a strange, raspy voice. "You might be sailing with Captain Silver." "But I'm Edward," I said, frowning. McGowan laughed. Only jokin', lad. You didn't really think I was Long John Silver. I blinked. Good God, lad, McGowan cried with a look of horror. Don't tell me you've never read Treasure Island. I shook my head. Oh no, that simply won't do, said McGowan. No, not one bit. Lad, you haven't lived till you've read Treasure Island. Now that is a proper book for boys. McGowan turned to his toolbox and after rifling through the clutter of spanners, pulled out a yellowed, tattered book, smeared with decades of grease stains. Still have my copy from when I was a boy, he said, handing it to me. Thank you, sir, I said, dumbstruck. From the faded cover, a pirate with an eye patch glared menacingly, pistol and cutlass crossed over his chest. Now we'll have none of this sir nonsense, said McGowan. You can call me Bill. Now I'd be glad to take you on as an apprentice, though I'd have to ask your father first, of course. No, I cried. Please don't. He won't. Suddenly heavy footsteps came pounding down the stairs. Good day, sir, said McGowan as father appeared in the doorway. Old girl's just about had it, I'm afraid. Can patch her up for now, but I'll have to send out for a new one. Also just talking with your boy here. He's a right smart lad, he is. The board pays you to fix the equipment, father interrupted. Not to chit-chat with my boy, you understand? Of course, said McGowan with a deferent tip of the head. Meant no harm, sir. And you, father barked at me. Go up top and clean the lamp. I was up the stairs like a shot. An hour later the lights flickered back to life, and I heard the sound of McGowan's launch returning to shore, leaving me behind. The swagger stick did not come out that day, though it was well past midnight before father released me. Exhausted, I staggered back to the larder and collapsed into bed. I yelped as something hard jabbed into my ribs. Digging through the bedclothes, I found the hard square object hidden beneath. It was McGowan's copy of Treasure Island. The old Scot must have slipped it in before he left. At once the day's weariness fell away, and reverently I opened the cover. It was a revelation. From the first word to the last I was held spellbound, devouring the book in 3 nights of feverish reading. For weeks I could think of little else. My starved mind crackled with 1,000 swashbuckling notions of pirates, tall ships, parrots, black spots, pieces of 8, and Jim Hawkins, that kindred spirit who even shared my name. How I yearned to sail the high seas, to set off in search of exotic islands, buried treasure and adventure. But I was trapped, marooned like old Ben Gunn. Then and there, I vowed to escape Bell Rock. My plan was simple enough. When next the dynamo broke down, as it was bound to, I would stow away aboard McGowan's launch. As his apprentice, I would roam these isles from Orkney to White until I had earned enough to set sail for, well, it didn't matter, really, anywhere but here. But the dynamo stubbornly chugged away month after month, my restless mind nearly boiling over as I waited for it to fail. It was clear I would have to sabotage it myself, by draining the oil from the crankcase, perhaps, or pouring sand into the sump. But under Father's vigilant eye, none of these plots ever came to fruition. And I needn't have bothered anyway, for at long last the dynamo finally gave up the ghost. Hearing the maintenance launch approaching, I bounded down the stairs to greet Mr. McGowan, but as the launch drew up to the lighthouse, I did not see him among its crew. Perplexed, I approached one of the workmen as he stepped aboard. Excuse me, sir, I said. Where's Mr. McGowan? He looked down at me with a grave expression. Gone, lad, he said. Flew. Flew, I said, frowning. Flew where? What? Where did he fly to? The man shook his head. No, lad, he said. The flew. These Scots had a queer way of speaking, I thought. I had seen many airplanes flying across the channel, and often wondered what it was like to soar high above the ocean like a bird. But as I imagined McGowan up there, flying off to distant lands, I felt my heart sink. Where had he gone, I wondered, and why had he not taken me with him? Hearing Father's footsteps in the stairwell, I returned to my duties, and from the lantern room I could hear Father talking to one of the workmen. What's this about the flu, he said. McGowan, sir, last week. You idiots, Father roared. All of you, get a mask on or get the hell off. Wherever it was McGowan had flown off to, he never did come back. The workmen stayed through the afternoon, working atop the lantern where they installed a tall metal mast, and in the storage room where Father kept his books. When they finished and returned to the mainland, I crept downstairs and peered through the door. On the chart table now stood a large black metal box covered in lights and knobs, from which cables snaked up to the ceiling, down to a large storage battery on the floor, and back to a pair of headphones hanging from a peg on the wall. I immediately recognized it as a Marconi wireless. I'd read about such devices in Father's books, and how they allowed one to speak to men on the other side of the earth using invisible waves echoing through the ether, no telegraph wires required. Reverently I ran my finger over the bakelite knobs and toggle switches, then rested it on the signaling key, feeling the satisfying click as I pressed it down. At the flick of a switch, the machine sprang to life, and I felt a warm hum through my fingertips, a tingle of possibility. "The hell are you doing in here?" Father growled behind me. I bolted from the room, managing to pocket the wireless manual as I went. That night I devoured every word, and in the morning I returned to the wireless room eager to try out all that I had learned. But when I reached the door, I found it firmly padlocked, and suddenly my little stone world seemed smaller still. Some weeks later I found my fortunes improved when Father suddenly took ill. Refusing aid from shore, every evening he dragged himself to the rail, pale and shivering, to keep his nightly watch. During the day he remained bedridden, and as such I was at last entrusted with operating the signal flags and Aldous lamp to maintain contact with the shore. The wireless, however, remained off limits. I wasted no time enjoying this newfound freedom. On the first clear day I installed the Aldous lamp on the rail and set about practicing my Morse code. "How are you?" I signaled, not knowing what else to say. I smiled as a blinking light answered through the mist. "What is your emergency?" "None," I assured them. "All's well." I sighed as the stern response reached me. "Lamp for vital messages only." When passing ships proved equally uninterested in idle chit-chat, I found myself more alone than ever, and slipped into a dreadful melancholy. Had Father not been laid out with fever, he surely would have thrashed me for my carelessness and inattention that day. It was not until that evening that I suddenly realized I could finally effect my escape. There would be no half measures this time. With Father too ill to give chase, I would never have a better chance. That night I began my preparations. With one of Father's old shirts for a tunic, a signal flag for a bandana, and a boat knife for a cutlass, I fashioned a respectable buccaneer's uniform. And with pitch on an old tarpaulin I painted a menacing Jolly Roger. A sextant case became my treasure chest, into which I placed my most precious booty, Sergeant George and McGowan's copy of Treasure Island. When all was ready, I lay on my damp bed and waited for dawn. I awoke to a glorious red sky. Treasure chest tucked under my arm, I crept silently down to the receiving bay where I set about unfolding the collapsible whaleboat, a flimsy construction of wood and canvas kept only for emergencies. Though far faster, the motor launch, hanging on davits outside, alas required 2 men to launch. As I unfolded the frame, the rusty hinges screeched in protest. I froze and held my breath, but Father's rattling snore continued to echo down the staircase. Slowly, carefully, I eased the boat open, and mustering all my strength, shoved it out the door. The moment it hit the water, I leapt aboard, nearly capsizing it in the process. When the boat ceased its rocking, I unfolded the oars and gave a mighty heave. Again I pulled, and again, the lighthouse receding with each stroke. As the salt air kissed my face and the gulls wheeled and squawked overhead, I belted out the old pirate shanty. 15 men on a dead man's chest, drink and the devil had done with the rest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. But 1 man of a crew alive, what put to sea with 75, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Despite the rolling surf, my progress was swift. By the end of the day I would be long gone, never again to set eyes on that accursed beacon. But first, I had business to attend to. 100 yards ahead lay the Shoals, a jagged spine of rock upon which countless ships had once foundered. From its crags jutted 4 twisted iron rods, all that remained of the beacon house that once sheltered the workmen and engineers who built Bell Rock. To these I tied the painter of my boat before leaping ashore, cutlass between my teeth, to plant the Jolly Roger in the name of the most bloodthirsty pirate in these waters. My claim staked, I wedged my treasure chest into a crevice where neither tide nor swell could dislodge it. One day, my fortune made on the high seas, I would return to claim it. I had just started back to the boat when a deep throbbing sound filled the air. A small fishing boat was approaching, its captain leaning over the gunwales holding a megaphone. "Ahoy!" he shouted. "What are you doing out there, lad?" "Marooned," I laughed. "Can you row over?" said the fisherman. "I cannot come closer to the shores." I gave him a cheery wave before scrambling back to the whaleboat, grinning at my good fortune. A thick haze had descended over the bay, and dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. I would have had to row like mad to reach the shore ahead of the coming squall. Perhaps this fisherman might even take me on as crew, I thought. Surely any captain worth his salt would be glad to have so able a seaman as I aboard. Buoyed by this thought, I drew in the painter and cast a wistful glance towards Bell Rock, what I hoped would be my last. But my heart nearly seized as I saw the motor launch racing towards me. Father, pale as a sheet, at the tiller. "Edward," he barked, "get back here at once." I leapt into the whaleboat and fumbled with the oars, but the launch was closing too swiftly. In a panicked daze, I glanced over to the fishing boat, barely 50 yards away. With jagged rocks lurking just below the surface, Father could not maneuver too closely. I could just make it if I swam. Bracing myself against the frigid waters, I tensed my body and dove in. But that moment's hesitation proved a moment too long. Before I even touched the water, I felt myself wrenched back and landed with a painful thud in the bottom of Father's launch. "Is everything all right?" the fisherman called through his megaphone. "Yes, sawed off!" Father bellowed. Scowling indignantly, the fisherman returned to the pilot house and sailed off into the open sea. Cowering at the bottom of the launch, I watched as the lighthouse loomed into view overhead, like some sea monster about to swallow me whole. That day, I got the worst thrashing of my life. In spite of his illness, Father poured every drop of his strength into me, sending the swagger stick slicing deep into my flesh. As each fiery stroke fell, I fixed my eyes on the door, praying for rescue. But Sergeant George, trapped in his wooden casket out on the wave-lashed rocks, could not save me. As the skies outside grew darker, I endured my torment alone.